Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be talking about my favorite show, or one of my favorite shows, Desperate Housewives, but we're going to be talking about season 2 today. So about a month ago, I talked about season 1 of Desperate Housewives, which I fear is one of the best seasons of TV of all time. But today we're going to be talking about season 2, which is definitely a downgrade. We're gonna get into it. Before we do, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. You already know subscribing's free as hell. If you guys have been enjoying the double dosage of me over the past month, please make sure you guys like. It really helps out the algorithm finally notice me after almost 6 long years. I would greatly appreciate it. And let's get into the video. So after the massive success of season 1, the production of season 2 started pretty quickly after season 1 wrapped. Everyone from season 1 would be returning, obviously minus the people who died, with some new additions. The newest additions who will also serve as the mystery for this season is the Applewhite family. We actually first see them in the penultimate episode of season 1 as they moved on the lane during the middle of the night, and the next day when Edie attempted to walk them through the house, since they bought the house sight unseen, they declined and they were actually a bit standoffish towards her. The Applewhite family consists of sons Matthew and Caleb and their mother Betty. Caleb was actually played by 2 different actors, Paige Kennedy for episodes 2 through 7 and Nashawn Kurtz for the remainder of the season. Matthew was played by Makad Brooks, and the matriarch of the family, Betty Applewhite, was played by the iconic, legendary Alfre Woodard. One of season 1's biggest critiques was this lack of diversity, with majority of the cast being white, minus the Solis family, who were really the only POC characters in season 1. And even though the lack of diversity was one of the criticisms of the first season, the creator of the show, Mark Cherry, did say that the role of Betty Applewhite was actually offered to 2 white actresses before they offered it to Alfre Woodard. So, I mean, Betty wasn't always intended to be a black woman, but I mean, I guess. The show continued to pull insane numbers as the premiere pulled 28.36 million viewers and the finale pulled 24.23 million viewers. While season 1 received overwhelmingly positive reviews, season 2 received mixed reviews and even some negative. A lot of people noted the decline in writing of the show, and with series creator Mark Cherry writing less for the show, critics cited that as the reason. Either way, the actors and actresses on the season received positive reception even though the writing wasn't all that great. Once I get into the season mystery, y'all will understand why this season got such negative reception, because the mystery of the season is very controversial. It was controversial back then, and it still is very icky today. Desperate Housewives Season 2 received 7 Emmy nominations, 5 of them being for the production team. The 2 that were nominated were Alfre Woodard for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, and Shirley Knight, who played Rex's mother, and she received a nomination for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. This season also received 3 Golden Globe nominations, winning none. Before we get into the actual summary though, I don't want to say that this is a bad season. It's good, but when you're coming off the heels of season 1, which is, like I said, one of the most iconic seasons of any TV show of all time, it's a lot of hype to live up to, and season 2, on top of it just being a controversial story, just didn't really live up to it, honestly. It sucks. I love the show so much, but a lot of people, fans and critics alike, say that season 2 is the worst season of all 8 seasons, and I would have to agree. But I want to know what you guys think, so we're gonna get into the summary, and once we're done with it, let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I am very curious. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did last season with splitting up the season summary based on the housewives and then ending off with the main mystery of the season. But before we get into the main housewives, we do have some cleaning up to do when it comes to last season's mystery. So we get into a lot of Paul Young, Zach Young, and Felicia Tillman. So let's talk about their story and see where it ends up. So quick summary of what happened with season 1. We find out that Mary Alice and Paul Young bought a baby off a drug addict named Deidre Taylor, and this baby ended up being Zach Young. Deidre came back to get Zach back, but they killed her, and we find out that Mike and Deidre actually dated and that Zach is Mike's biological son. And we ended off with Mike walking into his house while Zach had Susan held hostage at gunpoint. Mike does come in and see everything, and we do get a little scuffle that actually ends with Susan biting her lip pretty bad, and Zach is actually able to escape. Paul returns to the lane after being stranded at the desert and reunites with Zach after he had gone to Utah to look for him. Put a pin in that because that's a very important plot point. Zach, now knowing that Paul and Mary Alice aren't his biological parents, asks about his birth mom and birth dad. Paul tells him that his mom was a drug addict and he says he doesn't know much about his birth dad even though he knows that it's Mike. At this point, Zach still doesn't know that Mike is his biological dad. Mike goes over to Paul's and tells him that he and Zach need to leave town because Detective Sullivan is on his way to get Zach. Now, I didn't really talk about Detective Sullivan last season, but he pretty much is a crooked cop who Noah hired as pretty much like a henchman and also like someone on the inside since he is a cop to find out more information on his daughter Deidre. We had some issues with the detective and Mike last season, but it really wasn't all that important, so I didn't bring it up. Paul tells Mike if they leave, then it's permanent and that he'll never see his boy again. Zach overhears this and he's kind of happy to realize that Mike is his biological dad.
If we leave, we won't be coming back. You'll never see your boy again. I know.
Detective Sullivan tries to kill Paul by setting him up at the station to get shanked by some prisoners, but Paul survives it. Mike warns Paul about Noah and how powerful he is, and Zach agrees to meet with him in hopes that he'll leave his dad alone. They meet and Noah is like, you know, you have two dads, like you have two men who care about you. And Zach is like, I only have one dad, the one that raised me. Pretty much saying that Paul is his dad and like Mike doesn't really matter. Cause I mean, really, he just found out that Mike is his dad. Like, you don't know this, man. But let's not forget about the Queen of Mess, which is Felicia Tillman. Now, Felicia, if you guys remember, is Martha Huber's sister. And you know, Paul killed Martha. Felicia knows, so now she wants her revenge on Paul. At the end of last season, Zach had beaten her up with a hockey stick because, you know, she sent Paul away. Zach was staying with her and Zach is like, where's my dad? She wouldn't tell him, so he beat her up. She ended up being fine, but she did go to Utah to recuperate, you know, get away for a little bit, but now she's back ready to get her revenge. Felicia gives Edie a gift at her engagement party. Yes, Edie is engaged, but we'll get there. And it ends up being Martha's teeth, and she causes a scene at the party accusing Paul of murdering her. She continues to antagonize Paul until she comes up with her biggest plan. She begins withdrawing her own blood, and Paul arrives home one day and slips on it. The trail of blood leads to his car in the garage, and in the trunk of his car are fingers. The cops show up due to an anonymous tip given to them, and they see all of this, the blood, the fingers, all of that, and they arrest Paul. We then see Felicia driving in her car with two of her fingers missing. Turns out she actually faked her death to get Paul arrested. Crazy. What a crazy witch. But she's clever as fuck. She goes to a resort and checks in, but uses her now dead sister's name. Zach visits Paul in jail and he asks him to go see Noah and see if he can give him money for a good lawyer. Zach is reluctant, but he agrees. He goes to see him and Zach gets angry at Noah after some not so nice things he says. Noah is now very, very sick. I don't know if I mentioned at the end of last season that he was getting sick, but he is sick. He's pretty much on his deathbed, only being alive due to the machines that's plugged into him. He tells Zach that he has no guts, and Zach responds by unplugging his machine, killing him. As a result of Noah's death, Zach becomes hella rich because he was the sole inheritance of Noah's fortune, which Noah is rich. I'm pretty sure I said that in the first video on season 1, but Noah has money. That's why he's able to hire Mike and get this guy from the police force and all of this because he is rich. He's wealthy. Now that he's dead, Zach is the sole inheritance of his fortune and he's rich as fuck now. Instead of helping out Paul, Zach abandons him to now live this new life of luxury. And that's it on the Paul Young and Zach Young and Felicia Tillman of it all. For now. I'm so glad they actually did kind of finish up, you know, tie some loose ends to this story because I love the season 1 plot. Like the season 1 plot, even though it's very convoluted, it's very soapy, but it's so good. So I'm so glad that they, you know, gave us a little bit more in season 2. And like I said, we will be talking about them later in a later season. But for now, we're going to talk about our next housewife, which is Susan Meyer, which also we're going to be talking a lot about Mike and Edie in this section. Susan's main storyline this season, yet again, is her on and off relationship with Mike and her rivalry with Edie. After Zach escapes from Mike's house, they head to the hospital and Susan overhears Mike not wanting to press charges. She asks him about it and he tells her everything, including Zach being his biological son. Susan, not wanting to be around Zach, tearfully breaks up with Mike because Mike seemingly wants to, you know, build a relationship with him. And if you guys remember, last season, Zach was dating Julie, but then they broke up and Zach was being very weird, stalking them. And then also he literally just held Susan at gunpoint. So Susan doesn't want anything to do with Zach. And since Mike wants a relationship with him, She breaks up with him even though she really doesn't want to. Susan attends Rex's funeral and she lets all the ladies know the full story about Mary Alice. Susan finds out her ex-husband Carl is dating Edie and has been for a while. So there was a episode last season where Julie was celebrating her birthday. Susan and Mike, as well as Edie and Susan's ex-husband Carl, went together. It ended very dramatically, and apparently Edie and Carl have been dating ever since. Did I mention in the first video that I actually like Carl? He's kind of an asshole, but he is. He knows he's like ain't shit guy, but he's so funny and he's kinda hot. Susan talks to Betty about some banging noises that she hears coming from her house. Betty explains it's her son Matthew working on projects, but Matthew walks up behind her and the banging noises continue, which is awkward.
There, that was it. Did you hear it?
Yes. Matthew's very handy. He's always doing projects around the house. But I will talk to him and we'll put a stop to it.
Afternoon, Mrs. Mark.
Hi, Matthew.
Even though she and Mike broke up, they have still been seeing each other, and Susan tells him that she's ready to accept Zach as his son. However, Zach has been missing ever since he escaped her house, so they go to look for him. Just note that Zach went missing after he held Susan hostage and escaped. This is way before the whole Noah storyline and him unplugging his machine and becoming very rich. So this is all before that. So Susan and Mike go together to look for Zach, and Susan actually ends up finding him, but he manages to escape. But Susan lies to Mike about actually not finding him. Feeling bad about that, she goes out to look for him again, and she actually finds him once again in the same spot. But the first time he spotted her, he ran off and ended up hurting his foot, so he can't run off this time. She takes him to go get some food, and she was going to convince him to come back to the lane. But after he starts talking about being with Julie again, she gives him some money to go look for his dad in Utah, which at this point, Paul is still missing. He still hasn't returned from the desert, so Zach has been actually looking for him. And because Susan doesn't want him to be around Julie, she sends him away, doesn't tell Mike about this. Mike does eventually find out about Susan sending Zach away, and he is pissed since, he's been wanting to get to know him, and he breaks up with her for good. And this is actually a pretty sad scene because at this point, Susan's mom came to visit, which I haven't really talked about Susan's mom. She is like a recurring guest role on the show. She's very ditzy and klutzy. Is that the word? Klutzy? I kind of combined ditzy and klutz, but yeah, she's kind of like that, and Susan's like that. So everyone sees Susan's mom and they see how she acts, and they're always like, yeah, we see why Susan acts the way she acts. And also the whole thing is like Susan's mom looks very young, like they look like they could be sisters, because Susan's mom had Susan when she was like 16, 17. But yeah, Susan's mom was visiting. I think her mom was planning to get married or something. Susan tried on her mom's wedding dress, and that is when Mike showed up to her house to break up with her. And then Susan chases after him in his car while still wearing a dress. She breaks down in the middle of the street. It's very dramatic.
No, Mike, please! Come back! Come back!
Susan finds out Edie and Carl have been having problems, and after a couple glasses of wine, they hook up. Edie and Carl do eventually make up, with Edie coming to Susan and actually thanking her for doing whatever she did to get Carl to come back, not knowing that they actually had sex. There's another storyline that pops up that's not that important, that could have been important actually, but they never come back to it, about Susan's dad. So apparently Susan's dad was some type of boss to Susan's mom. Like a very inappropriate relationship where they ended up, hooking up. She got pregnant. Her dad kind of just went away. So Susan has never met her dad, but she, for some reason, became very interested in finding out about him. She finds him. He wants nothing to do with her. Susan's dad's wife ends up seeing them interacting with each other. So the wife thinks that Susan's a mistress and confronts her about it, but Susan tells her that, no, I'm actually his daughter. They do some maths, and she finds out that Susan is actually younger than the length of their marriage, making her now realize that he cheated on her at some point and had Susan. And then the dad comes and is like, yes, I would love to, get to know you. We can have a cup of coffee sometime. And we never see him after this. So I don't even know why I talked about the storyline, because it has no purpose, because we never see Susan's dad again. Zach returns and reunites with Paul, and Paul tells Mike to stay away. However, he, Susan, Julie, and Zach go bowling together, pissing off Paul, and he and Mike get into a fight. Susan is driving by as the fight is happening and gets distracted and hits a parked car on the street. The trunk pops open on the car she just hit and the body of a man is in it. We'll get to that later. Susan goes on a date that ends pretty poorly and she ends up going to the hospital and she meets Dr. Ron. So Susan really is attracted to this guy and she keeps faking like injuries to end up at the hospital just to talk to him. But her faking all these injuries ended up bringing up something actually important that she didn't know she had, which was a wandering spleen. Susan wants to get this treated, but she finds out that she no longer has health insurance because her book agent was embezzling money from her that ended up making her lose health insurance. This was a episode previously that I just don't want to talk about because it served no purpose. As y'all know, I really wanted to do a really big video on this show, but since I upload weekly and I have a 9-to-5 job, I can't get into the gritty details. But just know she is a children's book author, which I'm pretty sure I talked about in the first video, and she had an agent. Turns out he was embezzling money, causes her to lose her health insurance. Susan tells Carl and Edie about this, and Edie comes up with a plan for Susan to marry someone with insurance so that she can have insurance. Edie hooks her up with a guy to marry, which is actually a gay man, but it doesn't work out, and Carl actually ends up offering to remarry Susan so that she can use his insurance. They tell Julie about this and they reiterate that no one can know about this because this is technically insurance fraud, and Carl is actually a lawyer, so if anyone finds out about this, he could be disbarred. Susan is drugged up and being wheeled to the operating room, and Dr. Ron tells Susan, who they have been dating this entire time since, you know, they found out about the wandering spleen. He tells her that he loves her, and she responds by saying, "I love Mike," and that she's married to Carl, which has him shook because what the fuck? After surgery, Dr. Ron asks her about Mike and Carl, and she tells him that Mike is an ex that means nothing anymore, and that Carl is her ex-husband who she remarried only for his insurance. And apparently he's okay with that, even though he's a doctor. I feel like as doctors, he should be like reporting that to someone, but you know, it's TV. I feel like Dr. Ron would fit in with the Grey's Anatomy cast because so much bad shit happens on Grey's and they just ignore it because, you know, for the plot. Susan attempts to make things better by having Carl and Ron meet, but Carl is super messy and he has Ron unintentionally meet Mike, which leads to a fight between them and Ron and Susan break up. Edie plans a surprise engagement / wedding with Carl and gets Susan to plan it due to her finding out about Carl remarrying her for the insurance. At the party, Carl admits that he is still in love with Susan and he kisses her, almost getting caught by Edie. Susan meets a man named Orson at the movies and he returns her purse after she leaves it behind. And Orson actually plays a big role in something that happens late this season and is the main mystery of next season. So we are meeting Orson for the first time. Very important character. Carl tells Susan that he and Edie broke up and after some drinks, they sleep together again. However, the next morning we find out that they didn't break up and Susan is pissed because now she is the other woman and kicks him out. Carl leaves Edie's house with his bags packed unannounced and Edie seeks comfort in all the other ladies. Edie and Susan go out to a Hooters-style restaurant with Edie believing that Carl left her for one of the waitresses there, which leads to one of my favorite scenes from this season. Like, I love this scene.
You got my back? Sure.
Here you go, extra spicy.
Edie hires a PI to find out who Carl left her for, and he and Susan are caught. Susan tries to pay off the guy, but she doesn't have enough money to do that, so she writes Edie a letter admitting to hooking up with Carl. Mike tells Susan that he paid off the PI so that no one else will get hurt, so she attempts to get the letter back but fails to do so. But she believes that she actually did it. Edie actually reads the letter and is enraged, and she responds by, you guessed it, burning down Susan's house. The burning of people's houses is crazy. Susan finds out her insurance check for her house is actually on hold because the firefighters ruled that the fire was started by someone, like arson. She's like, I don't know who would do it. Like, you see all these people are here to help me. Like, all the neighbors are here, including Orson, who she had just met. So she's like, you know, who could burn my house down? Like, I have no enemies. But she looks and she sees Edie staring at her menacingly. So she already knows. She goes to Edie and is like, did you burn my house down? Edie's like, yep, I did. And she's like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, I burned it down because you're a bitch. She didn't say that, but she was like, yeah, I burned it down.
You can't just go around burning down people's homes.
Why not? You burnt down my home. You stole Mike from me. You slept with my fiance. That's the trifecta. You're lucky I didn't torch your car.
Susan's like, well, I'm gonna go to police. And Edie's like, well, you don't have any proof. Like, no one else heard this but me and you. So like, how are you gonna prove that? So with the help of Mike, Susan ends up getting mic'd up, going to Edie's house to try to get her to admit to burning down her house while she's, wired. She does so, but Edie peeps that she's wired, chases after her, and it ends with Edie getting stung by a whole bunch of hornets or wasps or something. But Edie is not looking good, and she ends up in the hospital.
You can't outrun me, Meyer! I'm in the best shape of my life! Well, good! Then you'll be prime meat picking when you go to jail! You get it! Fight me! What the hell?
Susan tries to come up with a deal with her so that, she can get her money and Edie won't get in as much trouble. But Edie's like, fuck that bitch. I am gonna get my revenge on you. And that's kind of where that whole thing ends. Susan and Mike both plan to propose to each other without the other one knowing. Yes, they are back together. It is very hard to keep up with if Mike and Susan are dating, not dating. But as of right now, they are back dating. And I'm pretty sure this happens after the whole Dr. Ron fight. While Mike is on his way to meet with Susan, he is actually hit by a car, and the driver is Orson. Remember him? I told you he would come back. And that is it for Susan and Mike this season. More Mike and Susan drama will happen in season 3, of course, and Edie is finally gonna get her revenge, maybe? You gotta watch and see. Let's talk about our next person, which is Lynette. And honestly, I could have put Lynette first, but I really wanted to talk about Susan, so we're going to talk about Lynette now. Lynette's major storyline this season continues from season 1, but remember, she is going back to work while her husband Tom will be staying home with the kids. Lynette manages to find a job after convincing her now boss Nina that her family won't get in the way of work. Episodes later, Lynette finds out that Nina, remember, Nina is her boss, she is hooking up with this boy named Stu, who is the receptionist, which is a huge imbalance of power. Pretty sure most like corporate jobs, even like when I worked at McDonald's when I was younger, I just stopped working there like 2 years ago. When I worked at McDonald's, there was actually a rule that obviously no one followed, that managers can't date, regular crew members, but people still did anyway. Lynette's boss dating or hooking up with the receptionist is a huge imbalance of power and violates, work policy. Lynette gives Stu the idea of suing for sexual harassment, because Lynette doesn't like Nina. Nina's kind of mean, so she wants Nina out. So Stu actually does end up suing, and because they had to settle, with a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of people got laid off / fired, including Nina. And now Lynette is still at the job. She takes Nina's spot. And now that the staff has been, lowered, there's a lot less people, Lynette's gonna have to work a lot harder, longer hours, which means being away from her family even longer. Lynette tells Ed, who also has a kid that he's not around as much, that they should try to set up a company daycare. They eventually get the daycare after some minor kidnapping. The kids get chickenpox and Tom wants Lynette to stay with them because he's never had it, and if he gets it, it can make him sterile. Lynette wonders if he wants more kids, and he tells her for some reason that if they were to get divorced or if she dies, that he would still want to have more kids.
You're saying that if I died, you would want a second wife and a family?
Maybe.
I can't believe you've actually thought about this.
Haven't you?
Thought about who I'd marry if you died? No?
Like, why would you tell your wife that? Like, Tom is literally the worst. Like, I don't think I emphasized this as much in the first video on season 1, but Tom is literally the worst. Tom really thought he ate telling Lynette to go to work while he stays home, but he struggles with watching the kids just as she did, and now he wants to go back to work. He gets interviewed at Lynette's job, and he gets hired, and they use the company daycare for their kids. So remember, Lynette took over Nina's job, so Lynette will be Tom's boss now, and Lynette asks Tom to promise not to bring work home, and he promises to do so. Will he, hold up to that? Spoiler alert, no, because Tom sucks. Lynette asks Bree to watch her kids, and she does, but her kids manage to escape while under her care, causing a rift in their friendship. We'll talk a little bit more about this in Bree's section. Tom starts to resent Lynette because she's the boss both at work and home. Remember how I said that he was gonna do it? Literally like 4 episodes later, maybe not even that, like 3, he's like pissed because she runs things at work and she runs things at home because he doesn't do anything because he's a... Let me not get carried away. After a misunderstanding and some very teen-like behavior, Ed tells Lynette that he's gonna fire Tom, but Tom takes it upon himself and he goes and punches Ed and quits. Lynette is upset about this and confronts Ed, but he tells her that Tom has been using company funds for personal use, telling her that he bought tickets to a show and flowers in Atlantic City. Tom tells Lynette that he has an interview in Atlantic City and she follows him there without him knowing, and while following him she sees him pull up to some woman's house with flowers, hugs her, and then walks in. So now Lynette's like, this motherfucker is cheating on me. How dare he? By the time Tom returns home, Lynette has taken the kids and left. After a while, Lynette finally talks with Tom and he tells her that the woman that he saw in Atlantic City is the mother of his child, a child he just found out about months prior. The child, her name being Kayla, is older than their oldest, and this happened all before he met Lynette. In the finale, Lynette meets Kayla and her mother, Nora, who is very interesting to say the least. Nora tells them that she bought a house in Fairview, so now Nora and Kayla will be closer to, Tom and her brothers and sister. And that's pretty much where we end off. So Lynette's storyline is still more of, kids and husband stuff, but her storylines definitely pick up next season. But for now, she's just still kind of the most boring one in my opinion. Next, we are going to talk about Gabby, who has a lot going on. When we last left off with Gabby, John confessed to his affair with her right before Carlos went to jail. Carlos refuses to talk to Gabby when she visits him, telling her that she needs to do a paternity test first. She manages to get fake results and show it off to him, and he buys it. He's still upset about the affair, and she's upset about getting pregnant, because remember, he sabotaged her by replacing her birth control pills with placebo so that she'll get pregnant, so she's upset about that. But they both agree that they're still happy that they're rich, because at the end of the day, that's what they mostly care about, is money. Gabby finds out John is hooking up with another housewife and she gets jealous. However, he tells her that he's only doing it to make her jealous and that he wants to be together. She says no, and she finally wholeheartedly apologizes for the affair to Carlos, and he accepts. One night, Gabby is stunned by an intruder in her house. She attempts to run away and falls down the stairs. This fall causes her to lose her baby. Very similar to Carlos's mom falling down the stairs and dying. I don't know if they intentionally did that to make that parallel, but I thought it was interesting that they chose the same route. Carlos is very upset about this, and Gabby tries to downplay her feelings, but after a while we find out she is also very, very sad about the loss of her baby, even though she never really wanted kids in the first place. Carlos is released on parole, and he begins seeing a nun named Sister Mary. Gabby is suspicious about her intentions, and she is proven right as Mary is attempting to get Carlos to leave Gabby. After some back and forth, Mary convinces Carlos to go with her on a mission trip to Africa. Gabby goes with Carlos to the doctor so that he can get his shots, and Gabby fails to tell the nurse about one of Carlos' allergies. He has a bad reaction to one of the vaccines, causing him to stay home, while Mary goes to Africa alone. Gabby playfully kisses Tom at a party, and Lynette feels some type of way about this. Lynette asks Bree if she is overreacting, but Bree tells Lynette about Gabby's affair with John, which not too many people know about just yet. Lynette brings this up after seeing Tom and Gabby alone again, and this upset Gabby and she leaves. The entire neighborhood now knows about Gabby and John, but for some reason no one is doing anything about it, calling the police. Because I'm pretty sure he was 17 last season, and remember, they started this affair even prior to the show actually starting, so he could have even been 16, but I believe this season he's 18, so I mean, still pretty fucking bad. Now that everyone knows about this, Carlo ends up asking Gabby for a hall pass so that he can sleep with someone else, and surprisingly Gabby says yes, do it. Mary returns from Africa and is back trying to get with Carlos.
We have a dear friend back from her missionary trip to tell us about her experiences, Sister Mary Bernard.
Son of a bitch!
Gabby goes to confession and says that Mary and Carlos had sex, and this leads to Mary being relocated to a new church. Gabby gloats about this to her in her face, and they get into a fight in the church. In the church that ends with one of them catching on fire. I think it was Mary. And after this, Gabby tells Carlos that she is ready to try for another baby because that is the best time to try, after you just get into a fight with a woman who was trying to pull up on your man. I just think it kind of sucks that Gabby originally never wanted kids, and for some reason she was convinced to have kids. That's another thing that we'll get into a lot in this show, that it's very conservative. Women must have kids. Gabby was the one that never wanted kids, and she has been converted into wanting kids. And we'll see in the future that like abortion and stuff is very like, I won't say they shit on abortion and like talk bad about it, but it's never an option when people get pregnant. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a woman. I can't tell women what to do with their bodies. I'm pro-choice. Like, let people do what they want. Period. Gabby and Carlos takes in a woman named May, who had been working for another neighbor for free, like pretty much almost like a slave. And this woman that she was working for, I can't remember the character's name, but she was played by Jane Lynch, aka, I can't remember her name in Glee. I'm sorry, but she was in Glee. Gabby's mom comes to visit and she offers to be her and Carlos's surrogate, but Gabby refuses. Gabby opens up to Carl about her stepfather sexually assaulting her when she was 15. Carlos talks to her mom about it and she believes that Gabby knew what she was doing. Carlos tells her that she was literally a child, but her mom doesn't believe her and she feels like that she was like pretty much trying to hook up with her husband. She was 15. Carlos sees this and he's pretty disgusted and he just kind of walks out. Gabby and Carlos attempt to adopt a baby, but one of the workers at the agency is John's mom, Helen, and she mentions how Gabby R-worded her son. I'm not gonna say it, I don't know, I just hate that word. And how Carlos went to jail. So of course they can't adopt a baby here. Gabby goes a different route and attempts to buy a baby through a disbarred adoption lawyer. They eventually get this baby from a stripper named Libby after she originally refused to let them after finding out they were Mexican. She found out they were Mexican and she was confused because she was like, but y'all are rich. Mexicans can't be rich. Girl, like I said, season 2 has some very questionable writing. Not that great. All is well and the baby is born named Lily. After a while, Lily's father pops up, who was originally out of the picture, and he is still in high school. Like, I don't know what is up with this show and these inappropriate relationships, because Libby is a stripper, so I'm assuming, don't you have to be like 18 to be a stripper? But she looks a lot older than 18. I would say she's like 22. This dad, the father of her baby, is still in high school. Anyway, he wants to take care of the baby, but Gabby convinces him to sign over his rights. However, the police show up and they take Lily from Gabby and Carlos after Libby changes her mind. This hurts Gabby to her core. Gabby is so upset.
We've been feeding her, and we've been bathing her, and we wake up in the middle of the night and we rock her, which is crazy, because if you knew me, I don't do that. So you can't take her away. It's too late. We've already fallen in love with her.
She pretty much lost 2 babies in a span of like, what, some months? After finding out Zhao Mei may be deported, they convince her to be their surrogate, as if she gets pregnant, she'll give birth to an American citizen. The insemination works and Zhao Mei is now pregnant. Carlos starts treating her a lot better than he treated Gabby when she was pregnant, which causes Gabby to be suspicious. Gabby discovers that Carlos and Zhao Mei have been having sex and Gabby kicks Carlos out. Carlos is confused because Gabby agreed to the hall pass, but Gabby's like, I meant do it with a fucking stranger, not the woman that's carrying our baby, which, I mean, touche, I agree. Like, if you're gonna hook up with somebody, hall pass. I'm pretty sure there's a limit to a hall pass. Don't do anything with my family. Don't do anything with my friends. Don't do anything with the woman that's carrying our baby. I feel like that's very, like, we don't need to say that. You should just know. The season pretty much ends with Gabby being alone in the house with Zhao Mei, who is almost about to have their baby. And that is pretty much where we end off Gabby in season 2. We're gonna talk about our last housewife before we get into the main story, and that is my favorite, Bree. I love Bree. Bree Hive, stand up. Last season, Bree dealt with the wild behavior of her son Andrew, as well as her rocky relationship with her husband Rex that ended with him dying from a heart attack after being poisoned in the season 1 finale. Rex's mother, Phyllis, comes to town for Rex's funeral, and she is a little dramatic. I mean, she did lose her son, so of course she has the right to be very upset, but she causes a scene everywhere they go, and after she causes a scene while out at lunch with Bree, Bree literally gets up and slaps her in front of everyone, like, get it together, woman. And due to Bree's lack of emotion, Phyllis believes that she doesn't care that Rex has died. Rex's doctor finds the note that he wrote before he died, and Phyllis sees Bree being comforted by George. His doctor and Phyllis come together and they report Bree to the insurance investigator. Bree goes to visit Rex's grave, but she sees he's been dug up. Phyllis forgot to mention that this was gonna happen, as now Rex's death is being investigated, and Bree, who has been over Phyllis's shit, decides to pack up all her stuff, put it in a cab, put her in the fucking cab, and send her away. Bree offers to take a polygraph test to clear herself, but when they ask if she loves George, her response of no comes back as a lie. Bree asks George to take a polygraph as well, and he passes with flying colors. Andrew returns from camp and he sees Bree dating George again, which angers him. George peeps this and begins antagonizing Andrew, leading him to attacking George at his swim meet. The police releases Rex's body to Bree, but then they try to get her to confess to poisoning him, showing her the note that he wrote. She is pissed. She is livid. She is so mad. So she calls up the ladies and invites them to a reburial, which they're a little confused about because they didn't know that this was a thing that you can throw an event for. But they all go and they show up, and Bree found some random ass place to rebury Rex, like next to a construction site or something, like, and she kind of goes off because she is so pissed and hurt that Rex would think that she would poison him and kill him, and that was the last thing he thought of before he died. Like, she's pissed, upset, hurt, all of the above.
When he was sick, I nursed him. When we were low on money, I stayed within a budget. I cooked his meals, I mended his clothes. For the love of God, I used to check his back for acne. And that miserable son of a bitch has the nerve to understand and forgive me? Well, the joke's on him because I do not understand, and I do not forgive.
George begins being weird. I mean, he always was, and even proposes to Bree. Bree originally agrees, but only because his mom was there and she felt pressured, but turns him down later, bringing up what her counselor told her. Bree has still been seeing the same counselor as she did last season, you know, talking about Rex's death, talking about how she feels, all that stuff. George is enraged, and he ends up finding Bree's counselor and throws him over a bridge. Bree meets George's ex and she warns him about George's violent tendencies. Bree pays it no mind, but she witnesses George's violence firsthand and breaks up with him. George begins stalking Bree, and later Bree receives a call from the police telling her that they have evidence to prove that George possibly was the one who was poisoning Rex. George, trying to convince himself that Bree still loves him, takes a bunch of pills and asks Bree to save him by calling an ambulance. However, Bree confronts him about poisoning Rex, and he admits to it, saying that he did it out of love. Bree tells George that she already called an ambulance, but it was a lie, and she sits there and watches as George dies of an overdose. Bree tells Andrew about George's death, and he's upset at Bree because if she never dated him, then his dad was to be alive. Bree tells Andrew that he didn't die on his own terms, letting Andrew know that she was there when he died. Bree enters her homophobic era when she sees Andrew kissing Justin, John's friend from last season. Later, Bree catches them in bed together and threatens to call the police. Question mark. But Andrew tells her that if she calls police on him, then she'll tell the police about how she has something to do with George's death, and that gets her to, not do it. Bree is suspicious of the new neighbor, Betty Applewhite, and tries to get some tea from the same detective that was accusing her of killing Rex, but fails. She and Betty have a little heart-to-heart that ends with Betty telling Bree that she will soon be moving. Bree catches Betty's sons Matthew in her daughter Danielle's room, and she's pissed, but Betty is even more pissed.
I just thought you should know that I came home to find your son hiding underneath my daughter's bed. And it just seems to me that...
Inside. Right now.
The next day, Betty comes over to Bree's to discuss their children's relationship, and while Betty is talking to her, Bree notices someone in Betty's house looking through the windows. Bree notices the person she saw in Betty's window in the newspaper, and she plans to tell the other ladies. Danielle tells Matthew this, and they confess to their family secrets, with Danielle telling Matthew about the whole Andrew running over Carlos's mom from last season. And of course, Matthew tells his mom about what Danielle told him, and now Betty has some dirt on Bree. So Betty's like, Bree, if you tell anyone about my other son, which is Caleb, which is the one that she saw in the windows, Betty's like, if you tell anyone about Caleb, I'll tell everyone about how your son ran over Carlos's mom. So now they're at, a stalemate. I think that's the word. Stalemate? Because they both have tea on each other. So Bree has been going through a lot. Rex dying. Finding out that Rex thought that she killed him before he died. George being crazy. Finding out that George is the one who actually killed Rex, and then watching him die in front of her, and now having Bree know her tea. Bree has a lot going on, and she starts self-medicating with alcohol. And Lynette asks Bree to watch her kids, and she does, but the kids get away. Remember, I talked about this in Lynette's section, and it's because Bree was drunk while... Why am I laughing? Bree was drunk while she was watching Lynette's kids. She passed out on the couch, and that is when the kids ended up escaping. Andrew also knows about Bree's drinking problem, as one morning he saw her passed out in the front lawn and wakes her up by turning on the sprinklers. and he insults her about it and she ends up slapping him. Andrew wants to be emancipated from Bree, and he convinces Justin to punch him and give him a bruise so that people think Bree did it to him. Andrew decides to get a lawyer, and Bree goes to a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. She meets a man there named Peter, and she tells him that she actually doesn't have a problem and that she's only there to undermine her son's attempt at making her seem like a bad mom, which actually works, and Andrew's lawyer tells him that he pretty much has no shot at being emancipated. Peter becomes Bree's sponsor and they begin getting close, but he tells her that he's also a sex addict and that he's trying to distance himself from her because she's too much of a temptation. Lynette represents Bree when she and Andrew go to court about him being emancipated, and the judge rules against it. Bree's father and stepmother visit and they see how toxic she and Andrew's relationship is, and they decide to have Andrew come and stay with them.
Andrew, I find your concern ironic given how tanked you were when you ran over our neighbor's mother with your car.
Is she okay?
She's dead.
Well, Mom watched as her boyfriend committed suicide. And he was the same guy who killed Dad.
Andrew falsely accused me of molestation. In a mall.
Bree doesn't really want this to happen, and Bree ends up talking to Justin, Andrew's boyfriend, about it, and he doesn't want it to happen either, so they come up with a plan to get him to stay, which includes Bree putting out in the open some very vulgar gay magazines that Andrew has in his possession so that her stepmom and dad can find it. So they don't want to deal with the gay kids. So they decide to leave without Andrew, and Andrew is upset about this, but Justin and Bree is very happy about this. And Bree actually encourages Andrew to continue seeing Justin, as Justin seems like a nice kid and he really likes him, which now we're finally seeing Bree kind of warm up to Andrew's gayness and, accept it. For a few episodes, Andrew and Bree are on good terms, but we find out Andrew is actually faking being nice to Bree so that his next plot of revenge will hit harder. Andrew ends up discovering that Peter is Bree's sponsor and also a guy that she's been kind of seeing. He finds out that he goes both ways, and Bree walks into her room one night to see Andrew in bed naked, and she's like, what the fuck's going on? And then Peter walks out of the bathroom naked with just a towel on, and Andrew has this suspicious look on his face, and pretty much we find out that Andrew and Peter had sex in her bed. Andrew hooked up with his mom's boyfriend in her bed. And also, I don't know how old Andrew is here. He has to be still underage. And Peter is grown as hell. Once again, very questionable relationships in the show. I'm pretty sure Andrew is either 17 or 18 because we then see Bree and Andrew go on a college tour. But halfway to the college, Bree pulls into a gas station in the middle of nowhere and she pulls out some bags that she packed for Andrew. She tells him that she can no longer handle him and she leaves him there.
Mom, please don't do this.
I have to. I can't be around you anymore. I'm just not strong enough.
Bree has been telling everyone that Andrew ran away, and with everything going on, she forgot about Danielle's birthday. She attempts to throw her a big party, but it goes horribly, causing Danielle to run away with Matthew.
You look like a girl who enjoys her frosting.
No, I didn't touch it.
It's just a cake, for God's sakes. Will you please just cut it?
It wasn't me. It was Barbie.
Barbie!
With everything going on, Bree begins to spiral and she checks herself into a mental institution. While there, she recognizes Orson as he was there helping Susan go through her things after Edie burned down her house. He tells her that he's there visiting a friend. Bree refuses to talk to the doctors there and they tell her that she can't leave until she opens up. I'll leave Bree there because her storyline towards the end of the season kind of collabs with the Applewhite family and the mystery because of Danielle's relationship with Matthew. So let's go ahead and get into the main mystery of the season, which is the Applewhite family. So I talked about the reception of this season in the intro, and this storyline is kind of why. So let's get into it. We see Matthew prepping a tray of food and Betty hands him a gun. They go to their basement and unlock a metal door. Betty places the tray on the table and we see someone with their hands shackled grab the glass on the tray. The person that's shackled in the basement is constantly making banging noises. If you guys remember, in Susan's section, I brought up how she approached Betty about it and it was very sus because the banging was still going as Betty was trying to say that Matthew was the one doing it and he popped up behind her. The banging is because someone is shackled in her basement. It's crazy. Matthew is frustrated and Betty tells him that they don't speak to him because that's a part of his punishment. Okay, Betty goes to the psychiatrist and is provided sleeping pills after she tells them that she can't sleep because she keeps having nightmares about her husband killing her son. We don't know if this is true or not because Betty is kind of crazy. We'll see as we continue on. The story seems to be untrue as she takes the sleeping pills, chops them up, and put it into the soup for the shackled prisoner in her basement to get him to stop banging. While at Edie's, Betty sees a news story about someone being arrested in Chicago for the murder of a woman named Melanie Foster. She goes home and writes an anonymous letter to the Chicago police saying that they arrested the wrong person. I don't know if I mentioned, but the Applewhites moved to the lane from Chicago. We find out that the person in the basement is Betty's other son, Caleb. Matthew finds out about the letter and tells the mom not to send it since they're in the clear now. However, Betty doesn't want an innocent person to go away, and the police may be easy on Caleb since he didn't know what he was doing. But Matthew tells her that the police won't care and calls Caleb an insensitive word. I'll just put in the clip.
I'm mailing the letter.
If you do, you better hope to God they don't find us. Because they're not going to care how slow Caleb is. They'll just execute him.
So Caleb has some sort of developmental issue, and it's not necessarily clarified on the show what it is. You guys may be seeing the issue with this storyline now, if you haven't yet, because it gets worse from here. Caleb manages to escape the basement and ends up in Gabby's house. This is the intruder that Gabby saw, which causes her to run, fall down the stairs, lose her baby. Caleb is discovered by Mike and is taken by the police. Since he wasn't speaking, he is taken to a mental hospital. Betty manages to sneak him out, but she is noticed by some man and he follows them unbeknownst to her. We found out this man is a hitman hired by Melanie Foster's family to kill Caleb. He breaks into their house, and when everyone but Caleb is away, he hears noises from the basement and goes down there. While walking down the stairs of the basement, the hitman falls through the stairs and his gun goes off, shooting himself. Caleb notices this and does nothing, and the hitman bleeds out, dying. It's important to know that this whole thing was kind of hinted at earlier episode where they were walking down the stairs and they noticed that the stairs are kind of creaking, and Betty told Matthew that he needs to go ahead and fix the stairs before someone falls through them. He never did, which leads to this. Matthew and Betty discover this when they get home and they find out why he was there. They put him in the trunk of his car and Matthew accidentally leaves the keys in the trunk, and they close the trunk, it's locked. The keys are in the car. They leave him there until they can figure out what to do, but remember, Susan ends up hitting this car accidentally while being distracted. The trunk pops open. Everyone sees this body. It's parked right outside of the Applewhite's house, so now everybody is suspicious of them. After her heart-to-heart with Bree, Betty tells her about what happened back in Chicago. Melanie Foster was Matthew's girlfriend and Caleb was jealous. Caleb tricked Melanie into meeting up with her at a construction site and he attempted to kiss her, but she reacts by slapping him. In response, he picks up a nearby axe and kills her. Matthew wants to send Caleb away, but Betty refuses. Betty sells the house without telling Matthew, but when he does find out, he comes up with a plan with Danielle to get Caleb to be sent away. They trick Caleb into thinking Danielle likes him and he sneaks into her room. She screams, attracting Bree, and she holds him at gunpoint, telling Caleb to leave. She goes to Betty and tells her that the truce they had is off. Remember, Betty knows about Andrew hitting Carlos's mom, and Bree is like, I don't care about that anymore. Keep your son away from my daughter. If I see him again, I'm calling the police. Matthew, thinking that his plan worked, picked out some psychiatric facilities that Caleb can go to, but Betty decides she wants to euthanize Caleb, shocking Matthew. Yes. This is an actual storyline. She wants to kill her son instead of sending him to get help. Anyway, she poisons some ice cream and takes Caleb to a picnic, but before he eats the ice cream, he tells her that Matthew told him that Danielle liked him. Betty tells him to tell her everything that Matthew told him, and the episode ends with Betty locking Matthew in the basement.
Mom, you have got to let me out of here now.
You were willing to stand by and let me murder your brother without reason. That's an unforgivable betrayal. I am so consumed with rage. It's best you stay in there because if I let you out, I don't know what I might do to you.
After Danielle runs away from her horrible birthday party, she finds Matthew in the basement, and after fighting off Betty, she helps him escape and they run off together. Betty calls Bree and tells her that she believes Matthew killed Melanie, not Caleb, and he and Danielle have run off together. Bree, who is actually at the mental hospital that she checked herself into, manages to escape, and she is on the run looking for Danielle. So pretty much this is the truth of what happened. Caleb does trick Melanie into meeting up with him at this construction site, and he does try to kiss her. She does slap him, and he does hit her with this axe. But Melanie doesn't die. She actually is just knocked unconscious. And Matthew ends up coming up a little bit later after Caleb comes home, bloody or whatever. Melanie's like, oh my god, your fucking crazy brother just hit me. I'm gonna go to the police, blah, blah, blah. And Matthew's like, no, you can't go to the police. You know, Caleb has problems and they won't treat him, you know, right, blah, blah, blah. Melanie's like, I don't care. He needs to go to jail. And Matthew gets mad, and to get her to not go to the police, he picks up the axe and finishes the job. So yes, Matthew's the one that killed Melanie, not Caleb. Bree comes home to see Matthew and Danielle attempting to break into a safe with money in it. Bree tells Danielle about Matthew killing Melanie, but she doesn't listen. It isn't until Matthew points his gun at Bree that Danielle finally understands his violent ways. Bree says she will die to protect her daughter, and before Matthew can pull the trigger, he is shot by a police sniper and is killed. The next day, Betty and Caleb leave Wisteria Lane for good, and Orson visits Bree with flowers in hand, and she invites him inside. And that is it. That's it. Yeah. Is that story not fucking insane? They literally had a prisoner in... So many issues with the main storyline. One, having a black family, the one only black family, has someone locked in chains and shackles in their basement? Hello? Also, the way they made it seem like people who have developmental issues are violent. Like, the whole season, they had us thinking that Caleb was just this crazy violent person. And I mean, he was, because he did hit Melanie with the axe or whatever. But they never show Caleb in like a loving way. They never show him like being nice. The only time they ever show him is to like show how like crazy he is, or how he can't really properly communicate, or how he is just this violent person. Like, I don't like that. This point isn't problematic, but the fact that Betty never really interacts with any of the other housewives, like the only housewife she ever really interacts with is Bree because of Matthew and Danielle's relationship. And that one time she talked to Susan, but like we never really saw her talk to Gabby or Lynette. Like, she felt very separated from everyone else, which kind of just felt odd. As I mentioned in the intro, this season received mixed to negative reviews, but season 3 is a lot better. So much better, trust me. So you will want to be here when I talk about season 3 in the future. But for now, that is going to be all for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I always get so nervous before doing these because I feel like I suck at telling stories. I have a script and everything that I follow, but I still feel like I just suck ass. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this. That'll be all for today. I will see you guys on Sunday with a brand new video. Adios.